Alexa, what's the weather today?
Right now in Longton, it's 11 degrees Celsius with showers. Today's forecast has rainy weather, with a high of 11 degrees and a low of 7 degrees. Currently, it's windy at 31.6 kilometers per hour. Today, expect more of the same.
Well, good morning everybody and welcome back to another film. And as you can see from this view, that the light is far from fantastic, and as I've just walked down the little path there, it was raining as well. Now the forecast today is for pretty much to stay exactly as I've got here. So it's dull, flat light, it's blustery. I don't know whether that's coming across on the microphone. We're in a bit of a sheltered spot here. Blustery conditions and frequent rain showers, and some of those are likely to be heavy. That's why I've got the brolly. In fact, I don't think it's raining at this particular moment in time. So because of those conditions, I'm going to adapt my shooting style today, and I'll be looking probably for the smaller scenes. But if you watched my last video, there was an interesting exercise about comparing shots in optimal conditions against those in conditions like this today. So I will be using today as an opportunity to look for other scenes that might be more appropriate in those optimal conditions, such as snow or fog. It's really good to go out and practice on days like this, and don't just leave days like this alone because you don't think you'll get any shots. Days like this are really good for finding those lovely compositions that you would otherwise be running around for, looking for in more optimal conditions. So if I see anything along those lines, I will certainly be pointing them out today. But I think, like I say, I'll be focusing more on the smaller scenes today. And if an opportunity presents itself, I will try to do something a little bit creative as well. So I will see you in just a second. So what I was talking about only a few minutes ago was looking for compositions in suboptimal conditions, and I feel this is one of those opportunities. I can really see this working in fog or snow. Now the camera that you're viewing through is on a 16:9 aspect ratio, and that's probably what I would shoot the scene as when I was doing it with a stills camera. But just look at the compositional qualities, which is the important part of today's exercise when looking for these things, because it's what I was alluding to in the last video, where I went back to some of my snowy scenes and looked at them on days like this to be honest with myself as to whether I would have seen those compositions on days like this. As we've got one of those days, I'll explain now what I see value in this particular scene. So on the left hand side, you see in the bottom quarter of the frame, you've got the root ball, which is just anchoring that bottom part and helps to lead the eye along the trunk of this beautiful mature fallen beech tree. You've got a lovely big canopy laying on the floor that fills that central portion. Off to the right hand side, you've got a lovely oak tree that's filling a nice portion of the sky up there. And then also you've got another beech tree that's just arching over the fallen beech, filling in that upper portion there. And that all hangs together really nicely. There's no interruption, or very little interruption, between the canopies of the three main characters. And what's really important, I feel, for this is that the woodland is essentially 200 yards further back. So I don't need really dense fog for this scene to work. Had that woodland been much closer, the branches of the trees, the upper branches, would have got lost in the background, in the tangle of the woodland. But because it's so far back, it will enable them to stand out more strongly even in light fog. At the moment you can see that they are blending in, but I do like that, and I think that will work to my advantage because you can't always guarantee really dense fog. Over to the right hand side, it's an open grassland area, so there'll be nice light filtering through, and my ideal would be to get foggy conditions with some sunlight just peeking through. I think that would be really lovely. But compositionally, I think it works, and I think it's one of those compositions that is quite easy to see in suboptimal conditions, and it basically is as simple as that. It's just looking for those strong shapes and just trying to pre-visualize what it will look like in more optimal conditions. So I'm going to log that one up in the grey matter, and hopefully we can come back to it in the future and do a comparison. So on with the search. Nothing beats a splash of colour in a winter woodland. I have photographed this mushroom on the channel before. This is a frost resistant fungus called velvet shank, and it gets its name because the stem, or the stipe as it's more scientifically known, has got this lovely velvety texture, and it's very, very dark, almost like a dark velvet. I like this particular group. These are a little bit sort of not cohesive. They're sort of spread out in an untidy fashion. This little cluster here I really like. I like the fact that we've got some nice browns and we've got some green mosses, so it's not just a whole sea of green with the fungus in the middle. I like that transition. If there's one thing I'm really not keen on, and that is two of the caps have got little splits on them, which just takes it down in terms of image quality or scoring, let's say, from being something that's really quite nice and desirable to have as a print to something that's got a couple of little flaws in it. But you know, as many people do point out on the channel in the comments, that nature is not necessarily perfect, but as a photographer I like to seek out the perfect things that nature provides and make the best of those. Having said that, I'm going to photograph this one. So I've been stood here, would you believe, for about half an hour trying to get this shot. After I first saw it, the heavens opened and it's just been continuously pouring with rain. I didn't think it was going to stop, so in the end I thought rather than get nothing, I'd get my umbrella out and take the images whilst I had my umbrella over the camera. I couldn't film that because obviously I can't, I'm just not risking, that camera's pretty new and I'm not risking it getting damaged in the rain, so I actually filmed, I didn't film the process. So I've got a 100mm macro lens on, I've got f16, 100 ISO and 4-second exposure. This is a focus stack and I've pulled out slightly further than what I would ordinarily frame it up on. And the reason for that is because of a term known as focus breathing, whereas as you move through the various focusing points, starting at the front, working your way to the back, making your stack, you can lose edges of the frame or gain edges of the frame, and what happens is you end up having to crop that off in post-processing. So I make sure that the camera's set back ever so slightly more further back than what I would ordinarily want it to look like on the frame, and then recrop to that preferred format. Like I say, starting with the front cap and just working all the way back right till you get to the wood at the back, and probably 6 or 7 images, something like that. Now during the period of rain it was very, very dark, and underneath the caps of the mushrooms there it's very, very shady, and you can lift the shadows in Photoshop, but sometimes I do use a little bit of artificial light, and this is a little Manfrotto light. and what I do is I just hold it underneath the caps during the exposure. 4-second exposure, what I do is I just move the light around so the light is nice and soft rather than a harsh light. If I keep the light static, it will have a harsh or artificial look to it. And not only that, these branches here, if you look, you can see the shadows moving on the tree. Had I kept it very, very still, those shadows would have recorded on the trunk of the tree, and I don't want that, so I've just kept it moving around during the exposure. So I'll just quickly show you the composition on the back of the camera. So as you can see, it's quite a simple composition. The mushrooms are just set off just left of centre so that your eye is taken into the frame, and that's complemented by this diagonal line of moss. And I really do love the transition of the green to the lovely browns. And what I didn't mention on just a second ago is that I've also got a polarizer on as well, because it doesn't remove much, but just about there's some reflections on the bark, and I didn't want those. And the polarizer doesn't get rid of them completely, but it does help. They've gone there now, so I much prefer that. There is just a little bit on the edge here, but I think with the recropping of the focus breathing, I think I'll probably lose that little bit anyway. So I'll put that on now. So one of the highlights whenever I'm out taking photographs is always finding signs of nature, wildlife, and that's what we've got here. So as you can see, there's a nice big burr patch here where something's been grubbing, looking for food. They could be looking for fresh green shoots, or looking for grubs, beetles, earthworms, things like that. And any number of animals here in the UK could have done that. Badger, deer, rabbits, even birds can clear vegetation when they're looking for worms and leave a burr patch like that. But one of the tips that I use is to look around for the droppings. Now, unlike us humans, animals like to poo most animals like to poo while they eat. And I'm not saying that you don't, but most of us generally don't. So looking around the area of foraging, I've just noticed here that there are some droppings. And the distance from the foraging to the droppings certainly says to me, and looking at the type of droppings, the round, almost bean-shaped ones, green being an animal that feeds on vegetation, and the size of them tells me that that's almost certainly a type of deer, and in this instance where I live, it's almost certainly going to be a roe deer. Badgers are a little bit of an exception to that rule in that they generally have set places where they poo. So I wouldn't necessarily have found poo in this vicinity had it been badger, and that's what would have made me think more along the lines of badger over a deer. Rabbits similarly poo wherever they eat, and you'd have found the droppings, which actually look similar to roe deer but more round. You'd have found those in the direct vicinity of the foraging patch. But it's nice to know what lies in the woodland, what I might just come across as I'm walking through quietly. So yeah, nice to see. Keep your eyes peeled for signs of wildlife when you're out. It's always really interesting to sort of work out what animal it might, or bird it might have been. So the sun is trying to come out, but I hope it'll be brief because the shot that I've just found really doesn't lend itself to sunny conditions. I was literally walking along, just minding my own business, and this just jumped out at me. It was so strong, and I'm going to pass the camera over the subject now so you can see literally how it occurred to me when I walked past it. So typically the beach woodland floor looks very, very samey for the most part, where it's just got uninterrupted layers of decaying leaf matter, but just occasionally that's interrupted by other things, and this is what happened here. So if I pass over this area, you can see now, look at all those lovely haircat mosses just coming into view, and I just feel that there's a composition there. It might be a little bit difficult to find, but it's just going to be about getting some nice even distribution of the mosses in relation to the leaves. So I'm definitely going to get the camera out and have a go at this. I just need that sun to disappear. So the camera's all set up in a very, very typical fashion for me and this type of photography, whereas it pretty much is a flat abstract shot, and the key thing is, as I've said before, is that the centre plane is nice and flat to the subject, and that reduces depth of field complications, which you would get if the camera was at a funny angle, at a more of a diagonal angle to the flat surface. So you need the camera as flat as possible if you can get it, and that reduces depth of field issues, and you can sometimes stop down to a much larger aperture, such as f8, and get your lens where it's at its more optimum point of sharpness. For this camera, f16 is perfectly acceptable, and that's what it's currently set on. Now I've taken 2 shots already. The first one was just at f16, focusing on the top of the moss, because when I reviewed the image, it seemed acceptably sharp to my eye on the back of this little LCD. Now the problem with that is when I get it on the big screen, it might not be quite as sharp as I'd hoped. And as I've said before, depth of field reduces as magnification increases. So what I've done is I've taken a second shot just as a banker at the bottom of the leaves, just to give me that option of being able to do a focus stack of 2 images should I wish to do that. Now it would look like a macro image this, but I'm actually taking in quite a large area, a footprint of the floor here. So those of you that don't have macro lenses, this sort of shot is well within your range. This is a 45 to 85mm lens, and it's at the 85mm end, which is round about 60mm or thereabouts on a full frame camera. I've got the polarizer on because naturally beach leaves are quite shiny, and because we've had a lot of rain, the surface is really reflective, and the polarizer is just helping to eliminate those reflections. Now the difficulty with this sort of composition is making sense of the chaos. There's a lot going on, and the key thing for my eye is to make sure that there's nice distribution of the mosses in relation to the leaves, so there's not clumps just sort of randomly placed here and there, trying to make it as coherent as possible. I'll show you on the back of the camera, and I'll just discuss the composition now. So this is the composition that I've arrived at. Really quite pleased with this. I have moved the camera around quite considerably before I arrived at this point, and this was the best as far as I'm concerned. There's a little bit of a compromise here in that I feel this little area here is just a little bit heavy, and when I was referring to clumps before, this is what I'm talking about. So it's not the most delicate word to use, but there's just too much heaviness in this area, but that is only a small minor point I feel in this case. I like the way that these 2 areas of moss anchor the top 2 corners, and when you look, there's almost a circular section in the middle of the moss, which I think draws you in. For the most part, the distribution of beech leaves all around the shot are more or less even, with the exception of this little patch here. I think the haircat mosses are just beautiful. The way that the stars on the tops really contrast well with the beech leaves, and overall a really quite a nice scene. So I'll put that on now. Well, as I've been stood here sheltering from yet another downpour, you can tell it's really gone quite dark. I noticed this lovely rock feature in the river at the back, and I've walked along this path many times, and I can only think that the times I've been down this path has been when there's been leaves on the scrub at the side of the river, and I've just never noticed it. But it's really interesting at the moment. There's a lot of peatiness in the water, and that's creating some lovely colours, and you can see the way that the rock has got this beautiful shape into it. Now, it's not without problems. There's lots of fine branches at the top, and there's a branch off to the left that I've had to do my best to exclude, and I think in an ideal world I would have liked to have included more of the feature, but it is what it is. I've got a 160mm lens on, so I've been able to get in really quite close and just focusing on the shapes and the colours. I'll get the little video camera behind here now and just show you what I've got. I haven't arrived yet at whether it's going to be a landscape or a portrait format, but I'll have a look and then make that decision in a second. The heavens are opening again. So this is the composition that I finally arrived at, a portrait format, and it was the compromise because of the branches. Now, just up here in the top left-hand corner, there is an area of turbulent water, and I do like the line that this is providing, which breaks up that area of black. I think I would rather have that than it being fully black, so that is something that I feel adds to the image rather than devalues it, let's say. The rock formation, you got this lovely strong diagonal, and then the sweeping water coming off it and the turbulence all make for a really nice shot. Now, in terms of shutter speed, you can never say one shutter speed suits all situations. It all depends on how fast the water's flowing and how much turbulence there is. I try to get images that are not overly soft and and certainly not sharp. I have a preference for softer water over sharp water. In terms of aperture and shutter speed, I'm on 1 second, f16 and 100 ISO. So I'll put that on now.
Thank you all so much for watching today's video. Images to come in just a second. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to press the like button, and if you want to see more, you can always subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing to do that. Leave some comments, let me know what you think of today's images, and if you want to support the channel more, you can always become a member. You can do that by joining YouTube or Patreon for as little as 99 pence per month. So until next time, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.